Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to see you all here, and I'm going to try to make this work. This is a picture of some of our clients which we are working for. Also some of our collaborators and actually some of my colleagues, they have these kind of offices. And oftentimes all they want to do is to find their way through this massive amount of data, to find collaborators, friends, identify maybe also those they have to watch out for, and identify also trends, emerging research areas, new developments, new collaboration opportunities. And what we do is we create black boxes which are filled with models. Those could be analytic models just to describe the data. It could also be predictive models to try to predict a little bit into the future. Many people have a very limited understanding of how you can render big data into knowledge. And so we have been creating an exhibit which is called Places and Spaces Mapping Science, which brings these maps of our collective scholarly wisdom to a large audience. And the maps are divided into 10 iterations, so it's a 10-year, 10-iteration effort. Every year, 10 new maps are added to this collection. And the first iteration was all on the power of maps. So you got to see really old maps, which were not perfectly correct back then, and they still helped to see important islands, to avoid monsters and to find your way back home. The second iteration was on the power of reference systems. How many dimensions does it actually take to map our collective knowledge? Third iteration, the power of forecasts. What can we learn from existing models for weather forecasting or for economic models? And how can we apply some of these models also to predict the structure and dynamics of science and technology developments? And then there are 5 iterations which address the needs of very specific user groups. There are economic decision makers, mostly in industry. There are science policy makers at the campus level, but also right here in DC. There are scholars like myself, researchers, arts and humanities scholars, and others, which also need to make sense of science, to be on the cutting edge, to see where their point and place in science is. And then there are science maps as visual interfaces to digital libraries. There are also science maps for kids, and actually that iteration last year was one of the most challenging ones, because typically these maps, they are rendered for senior decision makers. In many cases, they have never ever before been rendered for younger audiences. So how can you make sure that children understand why they have to learn mathematics and chemistry and physics, and how can we help them understand how these all interrelate? So we now have these 80 maps, and what I can only do in the few moments I have here is to show you some of those maps. I thought I'd start with one where you might recognize the base reference system that is used. So this is Europe, and overlaid are the activities of the many people which are using Twitter these days. And the color coding here of the many different tweet messages is done by language. And if you're doing a clever color coding of the many different languages spoken in Europe, you can actually get an understanding of what the language regions are, and they not always follow the country boundaries. This is a map which is probably better to see around the corner in large size. All of the exhibit maps are 24 by 30 inch, 300 dpi, and here I have only very, very few pixels to show them to you. But what this map represents are the 50 plus distinct technological events and scientific breakthroughs which made the videotape recorder possible. And they all have to happen at a certain moment in time in a certain specific sequence in order to get us this device. Now imagine you want to trace all the events that get you an airplane or a nuclear power plant or something much more complex. It's actually very, very hard to understand the evolution and the innovation going on in science and technology, because so many different events are actually needed just for creating one device in this case. How many of you have been using Khan Academy lectures? Just show me your hand. Very good. How many of your children have been using it? Fewer arms. Interesting. So Khan Academy is a great online source to learn many, many different things. And this is a map of all the many different topics that are represented in these 3,000 plus lectures that Khan recorded himself. And so you get to see it's mostly math, but there's also quite a bit of finance and economy and science in there. And this map also shows you what the longest video is, what the most watched video is, and how this classification, which you see in the middle here, and again, I apologize for the low resolution, I can show them to you here, is splitting up into the smaller areas of science. In this particular map, you see a map of science rendered based on download activity, based on the usage of science. If you would compare this map, which connects journals that are accessed one, and then the next journal is accessed, and then the next journal is accessed, and that's connecting them. And then based on these click streams of people downloading one article, then downloading the next article and the next article, using that data, you can then lay out these networks of download activity. If you compare that network to one which is rendered based on, for instance, citation activity, then you will see that, for instance, the biomedical sciences are much stronger here, because there are many people in doctors' offices which use Medline papers, for instance, extensively, but they do not necessarily publish papers or cite other papers. So depending on the type of data you use to render science, you will get different depictions of science. In the lower part of the map, you see a blue and yellow colored network. The yellow dots are the arts and humanities journals, and the blue ones are the hardcore science journals. And you see that these click streams via the arts and humanities journals are actually holding together or forming the core to this network of scientific journal download activity. Some of the maps in the exhibit show delays in the science system. Here you see a map created by the Council for Chemical Research. There are actually two big reports behind that one map. And actually the map made it as this yellow arrow graph, which you see on the right, to Congress and was used in a hearing. Here you see not only delays such as 4 to 5 years that it takes for foundational research, and 9 to 11 years that it takes for invention development, and another 5 years for technology commercialization. So it's quite a number of years which it takes to get from one idea to a product. But you also see feedback cycles in science, here in the form of co-funding by the chemical industry operating income, but also the taxes which come out of the products generated by federally funded research, which go back to the federal government, and then another $1 billion in federal funding is provided to foundational research in chemistry. The exhibit also has a number of interactive elements. This is the so-called illuminated diagram display, where you have a map of the world and a map of science, and you have this touch panel display, which you see down here, where you can first of all enter your name. So that's what many people do, which actually happen to have papers. They want to know where they are on those two maps. But you could also enter somebody else's name, maybe some Nobel laureate name, and you would see what their footprint is in the map of the world and in the map of science. And you can then also use buttons to select certain people or certain interdisciplinary areas where you would have to hold down multiple fingers to, for instance, capture something as interdisciplinary as sustainability research. But you would then see who's conducting this research in both reference systems, in the landscape of science map and in the geospatial map. We also work very closely with artists. Here is a world processor globe by Ingo Günther at the Miraikan Museum in Tokyo, Japan. And it's projected onto a really giant GeoCosmos OLED display. And we hope that at some point soon we would have one of those also in the US. It's really a gigantic display device. The exhibit travels very well in trains. So if you have a train station, you can have just this train drive in. And then you have to make sure that no exhibit is more interesting than all the other ones, because then you create a bottleneck. So people enter the train in the back, and they go all the way to the front and come out again. I think it's a great way to bring science to many, and there's actually interest to bring this train to the US. So if you have connections, I would be happy to make that work. We have been bringing the maps to public places such as public libraries, but also science museums, and here you see it at Stanford University. And we're always on the lookout for large places, because now we have 80 maps, soon 90 maps. The 9th iteration maps are just now coming in, and they're all large. So if you know of a good space, let us know as well. We have 43 exhibit ambassadors and advisors around the globe, which help to bring these new maps of our collective knowledge to many, many different places. Many people have never seen a map of science before. They are very familiar with geospatial maps and all kinds of uses for those, but they are not really familiar what you could actually do with a science map. So these are our ambassadors. And if you want to learn more about them, there's the web link as well. However, I believe that just like you can enjoy maps, and many actually do, any one of you can also create maps. And that's our main ambition behind this effort. So what I would like you to understand today is that you can not only learn from those maps and use them in your daily decision making, but you can actually use tools that are easy to use and analyze your own data, make your own maps. And that's actually way more fun than looking at somebody else's maps. And so some of you might be familiar with MOOCs, these massively open online courses. Khan Academy, I think, started this entire movement. And there are now many, many platforms out there, including Coursera and Udacity and edX and many others, to serve these massively open online courses to a large audience. And we have been doing open data and open code for a long time, but open education is just perfect for it, because now we can use MOOCs to teach open data and open code to many people out there. So this spring, we started to offer the Information Visualization MOOC, and anyone can register. So if you go to ivmooc CNS IU edu, you can check out all the many lessons that we have been previously teaching in many different countries and places around the globe. And that was fun, but I have 2 kids at home and I actually like to see them, so having all these materials online is even better. Plus, now we do not only have a room full, like this room full of people which are all there with their laptops learning these tools, but instead we have people from 93 different countries. And also in this mix are 300 plus faculty members, which was very intimidating to begin with. But I think it was very enriching ultimately, because students do not only get to benefit from what I know, but also from what all these other faculty members know. So if you use the ivmooc tag on Flickr or on Twitter, you will learn more about what we did. So we used social media streams extensively here. So we were 3 instructors. Ted did all the hands-on parts. Scott facilitated client work. We wanted students to actually work with real-world clients. And I was responsible for the theory parts. And what you get to learn is how to answer when, where, what, and with whom questions, using temporal, geospatial, topical, and network analysis techniques. And you even get a letter of accomplishment if you do everything right. And we also use these Mozilla badges, which worked very well. There are a number of tools which were taught in that course, and the course is still up until mid-December. So you can enjoy these lectures. You just won't have the official course in session. But a new course starts out next January. You will learn different levels of abstraction and analysis, from micro-level analysis all the way up to the macro global population level. And you will also see the types of analysis here, from statistical analysis and profiling to temporal, geospatial, topical, and network analysis. There are some examples here which are detailed in the MOOC. In general, we try to help you understand very simple pipelines. So I try to break it down into 1, 2, 3 steps so that really anyone can not only cook, but also map ultimately. So you read data, you analyze it, you visualize it. But the interesting part is that the visualization is actually done very parallel. So you have to select a certain reference system, a geomap, or a network visualization, for instance. You then overlay data, and then you visually encode the data. And then you deploy it on your handheld device or on a big display wall or on a screen like this one. And then you go back and you look at it and try to interpret it, and oftentimes you see that's the wrong data set or data is not clean enough, so you oftentimes do this in a very iterative fashion. And so these are examples of very simple reference systems that you might also be familiar with, or geomaps here, or networks which are much harder to read for most. If you have this table of types of data of visualization versus types of visual depictions of data, then you can actually benefit from those. So you can, for instance, go into the geospatial map and you see sometimes just a base map is modified. Sometimes you visually encode the nodes or records. Sometimes you visually encode the links. And that's all for one type of visualization here. But you can also go horizontally, and you could say, all right, I can either have a graph or a map or a network, and I can here place and visually encode nodes, or I could go into other cells. So if you have this in your head, ultimately, then you can very easily transfer between the different types of visualizations. We had really interesting clients, and I don't have time to go into this here, but the slides, I assume, will be shared, so feel free to check them out. Some are going to be also available next spring. I wanted to show some of the works that the MOOC students did. Some of them had very good graphic design skills. Also, Diogo Calmo submitted a number of really beautiful visualizations and very insightful visualizations via Flickr, so feel free to check out his work. Here he did a burst analysis of topical bursts for mesothelioma research, and he also provided a timeline with it. This is work by Michael Stamper. He looked at National Science Foundation awards to institutions conducting global warming research. And again, all of those are on Flickr. If you're interested to learn more, there are books and papers, as typical in the academic setting. But after the acknowledgements are shown here, I would also like to invite you to come to our Facebook. So we have one for the center, but also one for the exhibit. So if you want tools and data and research, go to the center. If you want maps and insight, go to the exhibit. Thank you so much.